I want to begin by saying that the gift economy and matriarchy are embedded in the environment, like our conference is embedded in the wider conference on mothering and the environment. Mothering itself is a sort of more active part of the environmental niche that species live in and our species lives in. So our own species, when they're children, are the creative receivers of the active gifts of the environment as passed through mothers. And I believe that that creates a kind of logic of transitivity that happens between the mother and child. And that logic, which is interpersonal, which something passes from one person to another. It's not an identity logic, but it's a logic of transfer, is really the key to a whole other way of interpreting the world that we are not using now because we are at least not consciously using because we are immersed in patriarchal capitalism and the market. Now the market has a completely different logic in which you give in order to receive an equivalent of what you've given. Whereas the gift, you give in order to satisfy the need. And the gift can be passed along from one person to another and create community like that. In fact, the word community comes from Latin for gift, muni, and it means giving gifts together, as does communication. Just at least to give you the idea of what I'm talking about. Gift giving gives value to the receiver because by implication it is that the receiver would not have been nurtured if she or he had not been important to the giver. So the giver gives value by implication to the receiver. And there is a little syllogism of gift giving. If A gives to B and B gives to C, then A gives to C. So you can see it passes around. In exchange, instead, we have an ego-oriented logic because you give only in order to get back. And so you give value to yourself rather than giving value to the receiver of the gift. And exchange actually stops that circulation of the gift, and it creates adversarial positions because each person is trying to get more than the other out of the exchange. And in fact, it's really not an equal exchange because profit is desired in exchange, and that means that some part of a free gift is being given from one person to the other. And nobody recognizes it as that. They call it profit. They don't call it a gift. But that is what it actually is. And in fact, the idea of surplus value that Marx had, which was the part of the labor that is not paid for in the salary, the value over and above the labor that's paid for in the salary, that is a gift from the worker to the capitalist, even if the worker would prefer not to give the gift. So it's extorted or taken from the worker, as happens throughout the market-based economy. In fact, the market takes free gifts from the earth also. and takes free gifts from the future, because by polluting and saving the money in its pollution, by saving the money to dispose of its wastes appropriately, it pollutes the future and makes the gifts of the future impossible to give. And so the market is very much an anti-gift construction. In fact, by giving, in order to receive, you cancel the gift, at least at one level. So I'm saying that the problem is the market, not the solution. And instead, our economists, have been looking at the market as the only solution to all our so-called economic problems. How can we do provisioning of our society without a market is the big question. Well, I don't know, I don't have an answer to how to do that today. There are many different projects and attempts to do that. But I think we really need a paradigm shift that shifts away from the market logic and the patriarchal logic onto the gift logic in all kinds of ways throughout society. So a different paradigm based on gift giving. And the main carriers of this paradigm are mothers, because we have to do it, not because we're altruistic or better than anybody else, but because children have to have it, and otherwise they don't survive. Little children cannot give you back an equivalent of what you've given to them. And in fact, we do have an abundance of milk, usually, if we are able to eat well, and it's not a sacrificial thing at all. In fact, gift-giving functions in abundance really well. It doesn't function in scarcity. And actually, I think there's a battle going on between the market and gift-giving, because the market needs scarcity in order to create hierarchical structures of power over. Because if everyone had enough, they would just give and receive each other, nurture each other, and they wouldn't need a market. And so actually the gift economy, the gift way, is a much better way of organizing society and of dealing with one another. So the market actually creates the scarcity by wasting the wealth on armaments, on wars, and by channeling the money from the many to the few. So that it creates a big area of scarcity and a small area of wealth with the people have all the power. And so this is a very odd situation, because the environment doesn't work this way. The environmental niches don't work this way. This is a new human-made niche, which is alien, actually, to the way we function as human beings. As human beings we live in the gift all the time without recognizing it. Every breath you breathe is free. Breathing in, it's free. Breathing out is a gift to the trees. Your blood circulates from your heart out to nourish the cells in your body, and that is a free circulation. The wind blows from a high pressure area to a low pressure area, and I always say that's the answer that's blowing in the wind. It goes from where there's more to where there's less. I've been working mainly in the last couple of years on language as based on gift giving, and it is what has really been my passion for many, many years. About 40 years I've been working on this same idea, and finally now in my old age I'm able to spend more time to work on it, and it's always fascinating. But I think that that if we were able to shift the paradigm, also in academia, from the exchange paradigm, which I believe all of academia is working in, to the gift paradigm, the whole new world opens up. And if just by factoring in mothering into everything you think, you have to factor it in at a basic level because it's been taken out at so many different levels. But it's really there, and it is the answer, and it does give you a new definition of the human being. The human being as homo donans, that is the gift-giving being, instead of homo sapiens, because we have to give and receive before we can even know, and especially instead of homo economicus, who is the creature of the market and functional to the market. In fact, we are always being made functional to the market in everything, and even our education is like that. So we have received a toxic inheritance from patriarchy and capitalism, especially in the West, in the so-called West. Other cultures still have a lot of gift-giving in them, and they still do it and survive by that means, but also celebrate by that means. And we still have it in us. We're still doing it. And I think it's really an alternative economy that's already in the home, like the 40% more that would have to be added on to the GNP if we were to count the housework, would be, is a gift that women are giving to the market economy. And we have isolated our gift givers in the home and separated them from each other, but in other societies they're still together and able to create community better. We're doing it as women, as feminists, as mother-based feminists, but it certainly is not, it's not enough if we are not conscious that we're already practicing a different paradigm. And we need this other definition of the human because we have, we act according to self-fulfilling prophecies, and if we can define ourselves differently, if we can access within ourselves the logic of mothering and the economy of mothering, then we have a way of criticizing the exchange economy and also of framing what we're doing. Whenever we do a good deed, we're doing it in the midst of a different paradigm and for a different society. So that is why I really think it's important to redefine ourselves as homo donans, or even homo maternal, because as a mothering being, because men are that as well, except they have lost their mothering way because as they are taught, they're in a different gender from their mothers. They are made to give up that economy, that way of nurturing, and now that needs to be, that definition of gender needs to be changed. And there are other societies where gender is not really defined that way. And so we in the West who are perpetrating this disaster upon the world need to take responsibility for where we are and what we're doing, because we can do something, where it's a lot easier for us to change ourselves and change our society than it is for somebody in another country to change our society. So we really need to do that. And I was actually born in a rather wealthy family, and I realized at a certain point that some people are rich because other people are poor. That is because there's a transfer of wealth going on from one group to the other. And that is what is happening also between the global north and the global south, and between different classes within the various countries. So these are transfers of wealth, which are gifts, given and seized, given on the one hand and seized on the other. And we need to understand them in that sense because the patriarchal capitalism is parasitic on gifts and gift giving. And so that is a way of criticizing the economy we live in rather than embracing it and like the horses running out of the burning barn and running back in again. That's what we're doing in our economy, in our economics, what we're doing to save ourselves from this crash is really just doing the same thing over again, and that is not helping. And I actually believe that that it's the fact that this economy is anti-woman, as many of you can realize in many ways, but it's really anti-mother. It's anti-gift giving. It's anti that gift giving way, and it's been constructed on that basis. So that is what needs to be changed. And I think that the fear of the mother, matriphobia, is in a large part fear of the gift economy. It's the patriarchal fear of another economy. Now I'm going to read you a little bit of this because I have some other things to say that I may forget. So in recent years, we've seen the battle between the two kinds of economies, capitalism and communism. Both are patriarchal, and they correspond only in part to the struggle between gift and exchange. However, this struggle between gift and exchange is even deeper than capitalism versus communism because they continue to be identified, gift and exchange, with the scripts for the two heterosexual genders in the West. Gift is identified more with women and exchange more with men. The script for the male gender is the deepest problem because it actually contradicts gift giving and is therefore consonant with exchange. It is not that we need to regard women as equal to men or better than men, but gift giving as equal to or even more important than exchange. Once we generalize gift giving, we take mothering out of the immediate family and view it as a logical principle that permeates society and can be applied to nature as well. This means that activities which are usually not thought of as mothering are, and that people who are not caring for infants are still practicing generalized mothering. They are practicing something they learned as mothered children and of which they have abstracted the principles. They reapply these principles at many different levels, whether they realize it or not. However, many do not realize it now because they are blinded by the anti-gift-giving logic and values of the market. Republicans and Democrats in U.S. politics can be seen as following a more patriarchal capitalist or a more gift-giving way. Both have succumbed to the market logic, however, and both use market methods. George Lakoff, the cognitive linguist who has been active in trying to reframe the Democrats' message, talks about the model of the Republican authoritarian father versus the Democratic nurturing parent, rather than mother. His analysis stops far short of proposing an alternative logic or an alternative economy. As unmet needs grow, the needs for gifts increase. Consumer society has wounded us in our compassion. The exchange economy blinds us to other people's suffering until it is our turn to suffer. Patriarchy, combined with capitalism, is a gigantic mechanism which is alienating us, turning us away from the gift economy as the source of our humanity. In our search to find out what is wrong and fix it, we are likely to blame ourselves and each other, and blame and guilt are exchange mechanisms. However, we need to recognize the gigantic mechanism for what it is, step back from it in our own lives, and change it as an economic system. The gift economy is even more radical than communism, though it is not patriarchal as communism was. There are many logical paradoxes we have to address to let the weaker, gentler way of behaving take over from the stronger. However, if we can depersonalize the object of our analysis and realize that our success or failure does not depend on our personal, moral, or psychological value, we can perhaps solve the paradoxes. Are you failing to satisfy the needs of your family? This is not your fault, but the fault of a system which is and has always been broken. So I want to talk to you a little bit about language and the work I've been doing on that. So in the last 20 years or so, this discipline called cognitive linguistics has developed and become widespread. It began with the work of George Lakoff, who I just mentioned, and Mark Johnson on metaphor. They propose some very basic idea schemas that underlie much of our thinking. These come from common physical experiences that are anchored in the body of every individual. They involve a mapping from a source domain to a so-called target domain. The most basic of these is, for example, up and down, where up maps to positive and down to negative. Another is a container, and the inside or the outside of it. Still another is the path to a goal, and another is force as cause of effect. Lakoff and Johnson explored the use of body-based metaphor as a cognitive strategy in a number of books, and they gave rise to a movement, even a discipline along these lines. While they have used this approach effectively against Chomsky's nativist approach and against the hegemony of traditional truth-functional logic, I believe there's a fundamental piece missing. In cognitive linguistics, just as in the nativist approach, I've lost it. The way words stick together, merge or blend with each other, remains a problem. Although Johnson talks about the mind in the body, and he has a book of that name, it seems always to be the individual body he's talking about as the basis of cognitive metaphors. Instead, I believe that the original source of cognitive metaphor is the relation between two bodies. That is, it is in the unilateral giving and receiving that takes place between mother and child. There's a recent lot of interesting study on proto-conversations, which is the interactions between mothers and very small children. And there's been a lot of studies done on that as a sort of music, sort of rhythmic communication, and it's really very wonderful, done by this guy named Colin Trevarthen, but actually discovered originally by Mary Catherine Bateson, who was the daughter of Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson. But she discovered it a long time ago, and it's now become a very popular branch of studying mothers and children. And at last they are studying the mother's son, a bit the mother's part of this. So they take place, though, in the context of the material nurturing of the child by the mother. A gives to B is a basic template that can be repeated both at the material level and at the level of sign behavior, where one person then imitates the other and they take turns in the giving and the receiving roles. What is fun and delightful in the proto-conversational interactions is that, like the adult, the child can be a giver as well as a receiver, and both can receive and respond with pleasure to the other's gifts of signs and vocalizations. The linguists like Bandler, Tomasello, and philosophers of language like John Searle and others seem to think that language is a system on its own, independent from the external world. They tell us there is no noun-verb complement structure on the reality plane, that nouns and verbs are not categories of entities in the world. But if we identify the subject with the giver, the gift or service with the predicate, and the complement with the receiver, we can say that indeed there is a source in the external world for some basic linguistic categories. A child is able to experience both giving and receiving, and the gifts she gives can vary. In the beginning, maybe they're just the feces and the urine, and then they become the smiles and the cries. The mother also creates a relationship of mutuality through nurturing and receiving. The mother and other adults and children, as well as the gifts and services that are given, can be seen as external reality regarding the child. Then the child also becomes able to track the gifts others are giving and receiving to each other. In restoring the gift paradigm, we can look at the mother-child interaction as the source domain in the external world for gift-giving, grammatical